Hi folks, Dr. Lou here with the second part of Inventions that Make Life Easier in Game Design. The first part was released this Monday, and this is part 2 about video games. So there's a brief list, and I'll go through each one individually. First, in the general category of technology improvements are graphic improvements. Old players remember when computers at least had monochrome screens and no mouse and no graphics. That is, there was no control over individual pixels. The computer could write letters, for example, to particular locations, but there were only 80 locations on a line and so forth. In fact, sometimes less than 80. Consoles generally offered better control of graphics, but they were invented well after microcomputers themselves were invented. Now this was all sorted out long ago. Windows 95 in particular, which came out in 1995, was made for a mouse and color graphics. Real time is one of those inventions. That is, events occur in real time, simultaneously, as needed, not in turns. This is natural to computers, while it's hard to implement on the tabletop. And you can make a case that it's more realistic, more like the real world. Yet versions of the famous game Civilization have been made for real time, then adapted to turns before release. Because turns allow players to think rather than focus on athleticism and rapidity of movement. There's no 200 actions per minute like in StarCraft if you want to be really good at it. That's a consequence of real time. Fog of war is another thing that's natural to computers because computers naturally hide all information. The programmers have to make the computer show things. So computers are ideal for fog of war, which is uncertainty of unit location and strength. Possibly there's just a big black area that you can't see at all. This is much more like the real world than showing full information is, though serious game players often want to see lots of information. Respawning. I almost didn't put this one here because some would call it a curse. And respawning, of course, is when your avatar dies. You come back to life, often with little or no negative consequence. But respawning has helped increase the breadth of the video game industry, video game fandom, by making video games not so much a game that you can lose as a storytelling machine where you're participating in a story. We see some of the same in tabletop RPG campaigns, some of them, where characters never die permanently for storytelling purposes. 3D, 3 dimensions. 3 dimensions are more attractive than flat 2D, but how many people even remember 2D? Although there are still 2D games produced because they're easier, simpler to make. But 3D was a big step on the road to photorealism, which is quite popular in big games these days. It was, initially at least, harder to program. That is, it was more expensive. The harder things are to program, the more it's going to cost. You've got to pay the programmers. But now the tools of software making, such as Unity, use 3D with ease, so it's not as big an issue. Massively multiplayer online games, MMOs. This is the case that hundreds or even thousands of people are simultaneously playing the same game online. It's usually avatar-based so that they have an avatar. Often it's a role-playing game. This has enabled games for more than one human side versus the computer all the way to many human sides. Typically, computer video games had been for one player, and of course a lot still are. Online gaming generally, in fact, is a kind of an extension of MMOs. It's helped video games and RPGs tremendously because people are able to play games with other people without having to be in the same place. And RPGs, online tabletop RPGs, are quite popular. And the pandemic had a lot to do with this. Two-player gaming online has flourished, but it was around long before 2020. So I'm sure you can think of more of this type. So always keep in mind some techniques have been around a lot longer than you might think. Thanks for listening.